April 5th, that is today, Korea celebrates Arbor Day. And in light of this occasion, we revisit issues related to the environment in this edition of our panel discussion. For more, I have Professor Chung So-young from Korea University. Professor Chung, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Nice to see you again.
I also have Professor Christian Franz K. at the Busan National University. Professor, it's good to have you on as well.
My pleasure.
Right, Professor Chung, we'll start here in the studio. April 5th, like I mentioned earlier, marks Arbor Day here in the country, but there are growing calls for this particular day to be reset or commemorated, that is, in March. Could you start with an explanation behind these calls?
That's one of the very good examples why we need to take care of the climate change issues seriously. Because when this day was first introduced in 1946, actually compare the average temperature at the time and then the average temperature this year, there is about 3 degrees actually increased. So which means that there might be a different timing in terms of planting trees. So that's based on this scientific understanding that there has been some of the strong opinions coming out in terms of the moving that important day to March. And so finally, decision will be up to the government, but this might be one of the important factors that the government needs to consider.
Right, I see. And Professor Franz K., simply speaking, the universal goal with regard to climate change is to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, I understand. Now, what is the significance of this particular goal?
This goal was set during the Paris climate negotiations in 2015, and they basically said we have to limit global warming below 2 degrees and if possible even to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And to accomplish this, countries have submitted nationally determined contribution outlining their climate action plans towards this aim, towards carbon neutrality. And those national contributions would then collectively lower greenhouse gas emissions compared to where current policies stand. But unfortunately, even if we just look what countries promised, we would still go to a warming of somewhere between 2.6 and 3.1 degrees warming by 2100. So this means we have to really improve our plans to limit warming to 1.5 or 2.0 degrees. And why is 1.5 degrees very important? So if we just compare this, what would happen if we would actually, instead of limit it to only 2 degrees instead of 1.5 degrees, that would mean about 10 million more people would lose their homes due to sea level rise. That's also something we here in Korea face. Twice as many people would face water scarcity, especially say in Africa and such countries. And more than 1 billion people will face extreme heat waves every year. So this means in order to really to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and also to avoid all those damages. They also would damage our economies, so we really have to speed up our efforts.
Right, and against the dire portrait painted right now by Professor Franz K., Professor Chung, I understand pundits believe that current geopolitical matters, including the crisis over in Ukraine, look to push concerns over climate change to the back seat. What are your thoughts?
Well, that is true because one of the heart of all these issues related to Ukraine situation is about how to deal with the energy supply and the demand, especially in Europe. And as we know that Russia has provided a lot of natural gases through the 2 pipelines to Germany and other European countries because of the disruption of this pipeline supply, which means that then countries in Western Europe may need to find other immediately available sources of energy, which might include controversial coal and other fossil fuels. So this might disrupt all these efforts based on the considered efforts made by the UNFCCC process among the countries to some degree. But I think that we never think that this will be a permanent setback, maybe a temporary setback in aligning our efforts with another new strategies based on the geopolitical situation. So in the sense that there should be no stop in making the further efforts to address climate change by the countries.
Right. And meanwhile, Professor Franske, I understand you're engaged in an extensive research project on climate change. Could you tell us a bit that is, about your undertaking?
Yes, I'm working here at Busan National University. We have an Institute for Basic Science Center for climate physics, and we also have a supercomputer, which we call Aleph, which is, of course, a very powerful tool for our climate research projects. And just to give you an impression how powerful this computer is, it would take me or you about 45 million years to complete the calculations that our supercomputer can perform in 1 second. And we actually need this computing power because we run very complex Earth system models, which encode our understanding of the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, so that we can include what happens in the atmosphere, the oceans, and ecosystems. And with this, we can run future climate simulations so that we can understand or get an impression what will happen if we don't stop emitting CO2 emissions. And from those simulations, we learned that, for example, that in the future, we will have less typhoons, but the typhoons which still form, they will become more intense and also can then cause more damage.
Professor Franske, based on your findings then, what look to be the repercussions of relentless rises perhaps in greenhouse gas emissions?
So, of course, I mean, we have to limit basically our emissions, that the greenhouse gas concentrations stay below a certain limit in order to limit the changes to the climate system and also ecosystems, which would also affect us all. For example, every additional 1.5 degree of warming would further rise or lead to rises in sea level, increases intensity and frequency of hot extremes like heat waves or heavy precipitation, which then consequent flooding, which can cause lots of damages, and also we might have to face more drought conditions, which would then affect food supply.
Right, indeed. And Professor Chung, Korea itself has signed into stone, if I may say so, its intentions to ensure carbon neutrality by 2050. What are the implications of this latest initiative here in the country?
Right. Last month, we introduced a new basic law in order to realize the carbon neutral policy in Korea. I think it is in line with Korea's concerted efforts for many years, actually starting from the low carbon green growth policy, and then now we have carbon neutral policy. So in generally speaking, I think we are making a good stride actually to make ourselves in line with what we are supposed to do in the global context to address climate change. And then this act laid out the basic framework of what we are supposed to do, including the setting up the new commission and also focusing on different sectors that we need to work on. And it also includes one very significant provision about promoting international cooperation to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions that can be used by the Republic of Korea for achieving its national target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So overall, it's a very good achievement. However, there are certain things that incoming administration needs to deal with, because there is this bill was made in a very short period of time. So there are several issues that needs to be further addressed by the incoming government, including how we can make the energy mix more realistic in the Korean context. We know that there are some controversies going on between nuclear and then renewables and then actual science-based research, and also policy decision-making needs to be made under this framework by the incoming government. And there are also some other issues that I'm sure that this incoming government will address.
Right. And Professor Chung, speaking about the incoming government, there are pundits who claim that the new administration is taking the reins of the office at a very crucial time, that its 5-year term in office will prove to be very, very important in tackling climate change. Do you care to elaborate on this view?
Yeah, sure. Every country's climate change policy needs to be understood and developed in the context of global framework under the Paris Agreement. So if we take a look at the Paris Agreement, many people don't know this important fact that last year was the first year of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So we just started to implement the Paris Agreement, and in accordance with the UN calendar in addressing climate change, there are many important deadlines that the countries need to comply with. For instance, next year, which will be the first so-called global stocktaking, that's where head of the states may come together in the UN meeting and review their national implementation of the climate change policy all together. So that's very important. Year after, in 2024, this is the first year that every country under the Paris Agreement needs to submit their national report to the UNFCCC, and it will happen either in every 2 years, every 5 years. So first, events that we need to take care of by this new administration will be extremely important.
Right. And Professor Franske, Korea plans to slash greenhouse gas emissions by 40% below 2018 levels by the year 2030. What do you propose to ensure this reality?
I mean, we of course have to stop using fossil fuels. So that means, one measure would be that maybe the government also mandates that only electric cars are allowed to be sold after a certain date. I don't know, maybe at the end of this decade, so towards 2030. But I would also say that also provides some opportunities for the Korean industry so that it could become a market leader in electric cars or hydrogen cars, battery technology and such things. And of course, we have to transition to renewable energies, and also we all in our personal lives have to reduce our energy usage. So I think we all can contribute a little bit towards this goal.
Right. And staying with that goal, Professor Jung, what can you share with us about President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's environmental policies, perhaps, especially those related to climate change?
Well, I think, as I just indicated, that there will be certainly a continuation of Korea's efforts to address climate change based on the carbon neutral policy. I think this will be continued. However, there are certain important changes to be made. First of all, as I indicated already, that there is important steps that incoming government, incoming administration needs to make. That's considering how we can mix the different energy sources, including nuclear and renewables. Considering that Korea has very few natural resources available. It's a small country having a lot of population, and we have many mountains. And then our answers to deal with renewables might be different from other countries, for instance. Also, I think that the Yoon Suk-yeol administration will be more pro-market and technology. So in other words, that from my point of view, Moon Jae-in administration put its emphasis on introducing a lot of regulations, which was also important in terms of giving signals to the market. But I think that Yoon Suk-yeol's administration will promote more market. Also, lastly, I think Yoon Suk-yeol's administration will be more international in a sense of promoting the international markets and technologies at various international meetings and other organizations.
Right, hopefully that will be the case.
Yeah.
And Professor Franske, could you remind us perhaps about the importance of forecasting climate patterns perhaps to better tackle climate change in itself, especially based on the research that you're currently involved in?
Yes, we don't really forecast the climate. What we call this climate projections, because in order to learn something about how the future climate might evolve, we have to make certain assumptions about the greenhouse gas emissions we as a society will emit in the future. So we have the different scenarios which are based on how fast we might transition to renewable energies, and also other societal changes, technological progress and such things, and how well different countries collaborate internationally. So we make those future climate projections, and then we can basically say if we transition very quickly to renewable energies, then we can limit global warming to a certain degree, and that also means we might only face a certain amount of sea level rise, and so that then also say the city of Busan, where I live, can actually adapt to this in time so that no houses will be flooded and so on. Then we can also see how many typhoons might hit Korea in the future, so that also we as a society can adapt. And also we can see how many extreme events we might have to expect, because they would also create damages, so we can basically balance the expected damages if you don't limit greenhouse gas emissions sufficiently with what we actually would need to pay for the energy transition. So that's also something we have to understand, that even if we don't do anything, this also would involve a certain amount of costs.
Right, of course. I suppose we do need to have a better understanding of the challenges we actually face then. Professor Chung, what can Korea strive to do to play a greater role perhaps in addressing global climate change?
Well, you are talking about the global climate change. And then, as I always say, that the starting point for Korea should be how to best work together with the major global international organizations to address climate change in Republic of Korea. We have two major global organizations, including Global Green Growth Institute and Green Climate Fund. And these two organizations are very important in terms of the providing assistance to developing countries, in terms of the making plans to grow their economy in a low carbon way. And then for that, you need to have a financing. And we have a financing organization, that's the GCF. So if Korea can make its great efforts at working closely together with these two major organizations, we also have other organizations in Korea, I think we can be a center of the global climate politics and economy. So in the sense that that should be the starting point, and every global climate policy in Republic of Korea needs to be further developed based on this basic important factor.
Right, so we have the infrastructure ready. And having said that then, Professor Franske, do you suppose that the public here in Korea has a strong perception of the importance of addressing perhaps climate change? As a foreign scholar looking at the situation in the country, Professor Franske.
Yes, I think Korea understands the challenges we are facing, and it's also my impression talking to my colleagues and people here in Korea that they are also willing to kind of address the problems.
Right. What more perhaps could the government do to encourage its members of the public to take greater action perhaps?
One thing is, of course, introducing some kind of a CO2 tax, so that everybody sees also in their daily lives, if they buy certain things or services, how much this actually would contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So that would be a price signal, which I think is also very easy to understand, and I think probably also to tell industry or customers to say, if we don't have to switch to electric cars, that at a certain date only electric cars are allowed to be sold. I think such signals would be very good.
Right, tangible
for the public.
Right, they're quite tangible, and they're also quite valid proposals there. All right, Professor Franske, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today. Professor Chung here in the studio, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.